Hi everybody, welcome. This is Justice with the C.O.W.S. radio program. If you want to learn about, understand, and counter racism, white supremacy, be sure not to miss a C.O.W.S. episode. We keep them jammed-packed with constructive information to sharpen your use of words to help eliminate the system of racism, white supremacy, ASAP. Also, for more information on racism, white supremacy, and to invest in my counter-racist efforts, please visit my blog, justdojustice.blogspot.com.
You're just saying just buckets and buckets of words.
Gus T Renegade.Is in for another episode of the C.O.W.S. Thank you everyone for tuning in to the broadcast. I hope you all find the program to be of constructive value. Again, we do not want people wasting time. If you do not think you're getting constructive, useful information to help you solve problems, get a better understanding of what racism is and how it works, please do something else with your time. With that said, I want to hop right to it. First and foremost, I believe Pam is greatly responsible for this program. She mailed me a link for a video and mentioned a town I'd heard before, Kirven, Texas, blazoned in my brain after having read our guest for today, his book. I read it some years ago when I was a lot more confused about racism, but many parts of the book stood out. The details, the violence, how it ended, just really stuck out. And getting my memory jogged recently, I thought, hey, I think it would be great to have that author on the program to talk about his book. I contacted him and found out that he recently revised the book, got a lot of new information in the decade since the book was originally published. And man, I mean, you talk about some of the grisly details of racism, white supremacy, and things that non-white people, Black people have experienced. This book is a really devastating illustration. Our guest for today's program, he is the author of Flames After Midnight. That is the book that we're going to discuss today. Actually, that's not the only book he's written. His newest work, An Accidental Historian, Tales of Trash and Treasure. He also is a partner for Akers and Boulware-Wells, LLP. This is a firm in Texas, and he has been doing this since 2007 when he founded the company. Real pleasure to have him on the program. He's also a former adjunct professor at Texas State University. As I said, real pleasure to have him on the program, and I hope people will enjoy hearing details from his book. Our guest, Mr. Monte Akers. Mr. Akers, are you with us?
I am here.
Outstanding. Really good to hear from you, sir. Pleasure.
Well, it's a pleasure. Pleasure to be invited to do this.
Outstanding. For people who might not have read your book, might not be familiar with your work, if you wouldn't mind giving just a little bit of background information about who you are and the work that you do?
Sure. As you've already alluded to, I'm an attorney here in Texas, and from 1981 to 1990, I worked for the Dow Chemical Company in Freestone County, Texas, which is a county kind of on the edge of East Texas, about 60 miles east of Waco, and learned a little bit about an event that happened there in 1922 that involved the burning alive of 3 black men, and its rather ironic aftermath, because the event essentially destroyed a little town that was a thriving boom town before. And I started researching it seriously in 1986, tracking down participants, witnesses, newspaper stories, etc. And the more I found out about it, the more captivating and ironic the story proved to be. And finally, in 1996, after thinking I'd exhausted all my leads and resources, I discovered a whole new line of information that led me to new interpretations and new realities that I had not dreamed of. And the book was published by the University of Texas Press in 1999. And as you've also mentioned, in the following decade, enough new information came in that it was revised and released by UT Press just about 3 weeks ago.
Wow. We tend to be pretty timely about things here at the Cows. Wow. Okay. I'm anxious to hop right into it and get into more of the details of what happened. Before we proceed, you are a white man, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. This program, the Cows, is an acronym, Context of White Supremacy. I have unfortunately concluded that we are in a global system of racism. And I use the terms racism and white supremacy as synonyms. I have the same definition for both terms. The definition that I use is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you believe that such a system exists, and do you think that definition is accurate?
I don't have any real difference of opinion, except to add that racism historically has existed in nearly every race, and there's been genocidal tendencies in many nations, continents that were not limited just to white on other races. But what we've the legacy of the slavery period here in America has left so many taints and clues to normalcy, should I say, that I think your definition certainly fits for what we're experiencing in this nation and some other nations.
Okay. Do you think white people collectively on the planet right now, 2011, do you think white people collectively have more power than non-white people collectively right now?
Oh, I think the majority is always going to have more power. I don't think that will continue as the percentages change over the future decades. But certainly, I think it goes without saying that the results of racism and keeping the black population in a subjugated state for decades is going to take a long time to overcome, and it hasn't been overcome yet.
Okay. I'm thinking the best way to proceed, and I could be incorrect, is if you could kind of share an overview of what happened on May 4th, 1922, and then I can kind of ask specific questions based on the book.
Absolutely. May 4th, 1922 was a Thursday, I believe, and it was the last day of school in Kirven, Texas, which was then experiencing a real boom due to an oil play nearby. And while we don't know exactly, there were probably between 1,200 and 2,000 inhabitants of the little town. One of the largest landowners was a man named John King, who had 4 sons, and his granddaughter was named Eula. And her mother, Mr. King's daughter, had died giving her birth. and she was essentially the only little girl in this family of men, and was kind of the sun around which the family orbited. And she was riding home from school that day, the last day of school, the last day of high school for her. In fact, she was going home to try on her graduation dress. And she didn't show up when she was supposed to. And the family began looking for her and called out neighbors. They found her, murdered, horribly mutilated. Her head literally stomped into the earth so that her face was level with the ground, and it just caused a shattering of mental stability among the family and the neighbors. And the next day, a huge mob began searching for the killers. And about mid-afternoon, bloodhounds were brought in from Huntsville by airplane, and a black man named Snap Curry left the search party where he was helping out and began running. And they realized that he had done so, went to his house, found bloody clothes. His wife implicated him. They chased him for 6 hours, finally caught him, took him to a local jail. He confessed, implicated 2 other black men. The sheriff came and tried to spirit him out of the county, was blocked by the mob, took him back to the jail in Fairfield where the other 2 men were already being held. Mob broke in, took them out, took them back to the little town of Kirven, and burned them alive one at a time. After that, a reign of terror started in which another 7 to 50, nobody knows exactly how many blacks were killed, lynched, shot, beaten to death, etc. As a result of which, the black community surrounding the area, probably in the neighborhood of 500 people or so, fled, all but about 6 blacks who were protected, shall we say, by their association with local white families. So that when they fled, the cheap labor source in this sharecropper economy that existed there was lost, and white people began moving away. Some because of the economic situation, some because of their disgust with the terror or out of fear. And as they left, some of them set their houses on fire in order to collect insurance. That caused most of the town to burn. So that within 6 months after the event, the town population was down to 350, and today it's got about 108. The reign of terror finally ended when one black man stood up to the mob, a World War I veteran, took a rifle and shot at least 2 men, killed them. And essentially this near race war that had broken out came to an end, after which there were 70 years of it being covered up, discussed in whispers, but never really explored until I came along in the mid-1980s.
Okay, we're going to make sure that we get into the details of, what happened in this reign of white terrorism that flowed for, I guess, about a month or so.
Almost a month.
And this not just in the area, but it seems to have reverberated outside the state of Texas as well, and you cover some of that in the book. I guess before moving forward, I'll double check to see if my co-host has some questions. Wow, just so many things run through that I want to get to. I definitely want to make sure that I get Floyd Gibson. Real important. That was one of the key things that stuck out in my mind 10 years after I read your book the first time. Floyd Gibson, a black person picking up a rifle, stopped all of this. I definitely want to get more details on that as we go. But Justice, if you have some questions you would like to ask Mr. Akers, your line should be open. Please feel free.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. At the beginning of the program, you said many races. What other races are there besides the white race?
What other races are there besides the white race? Well, Orientals, Hispanic, Native American. I would think you would probably know as well as I do.
No, no. All I know is just the white race. So yeah, I believe the guest is practicing racism.
I'm sorry, just a minute. I'm sorry. Did you say I was practicing racism?
No, I suspect you are. My next question is.
I'm sorry. I think I've been misled. I thought we were here to discuss the book, but if I'm going to be characterized in a manner that is exactly 180 degrees from what the message of the book is, I'm afraid it wouldn't be appropriate for me to continue. Is anybody there?
Oh, yep, I'm here. I can hear you, sir.
I'll ask some questions.
Ma'am, have you read the book?
No, I am only 12 years old.
And 12 years old, not having read the book, not knowing me, having heard me speak for approximately 20 minutes, you suspect that I am a practicing racist? Is that what I understand?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to apologize? Because, sir, or ma'am, both of you, that is as offensive a statement to me as if I had used a racial epithet against one of you. That is very short-sighted and very inconsiderate, and just flat not true. So if, I wish that your opinion wasn't what it is, but it simply is incorrect, and I would ask you to apologize.
I am not going to apologize.
Okay.
So,
Gus, are you still there?
Hello?
Gus,
Hello?
Are you still there?
Hello, sir?
Are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yes. And did you just listen to that exchange?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And is that the purpose of your interviewing me to lead to that sort of insinuation?
My purpose?
I mean, you've read the book. You know as well as anyone what the message of the book is.
I think there's a lot of constructive information in the book about racism, white supremacy, and I hope to have the opportunity to share quite a few of the details in the book. I guess my view would be that I think she has the same suspicion that you talk about in your book when you went to interview Bertha Williams, and her family was suspicious about what your motives were for coming to do this work and why you wanted to come and talk to her. I think a lot of black people, because of racism, are very suspicious of white people. And I don't think anything is incorrect about that. I think
racism is a two-way street. Yes, the black community, the black race has been the victim of horrible racism. But to be of any race and characterize another race as all thinking the same way or all having the same motivations based solely upon their skin color is just as evil as white on black. So it sounds like, I mean, I wrote this book. I became fascinated with this story, first of all, because I'm a historian. Second of all, because it has long been my belief that the very outrageous racist condition in the United States that has existed or did exist from about 1870 to about 1970, something like that, was largely the result of post-Civil War animosity as opposed to racial feelings that existed before the Civil War. So it's a study. The book is a study in a microcosmic sense of what occurred in one community where the results of racism were extremely overt and extremely violent, and was presented as an attempt to make people understand what happened and why it happened. And the purpose of it is summarized in the foreword. A young black attorney I worked with would talk to me, or I talked to her a lot about the book, and she expressed the opinion that the reason this story needed to be told was because the American racial experience is like a death in the family. When there's a death in the family, you go through the 4, some people say 5 stages of grief, which are denial, anger, grieving, and healing. And you have to go through each one to get to the next one. And our racial history is like a death in the American family, and many areas of the country are still in denial. Some are still in anger, and I'm afraid your talk show is beginning to make me think that you're still at the stage of anger. And then you go into grieving, and finally there is healing. And there's a quote from Desmond Tutu at the very beginning of the book about his views on the aftermath of apartheid. And he said, "It is not enough to let bygones be bygones. Indeed, just saying that ensures that it will not be so. Reconciliation does not come easy. Believing it does will ensure that it will never be. We have to work and look the beast firmly in the eyes. Without memory, there is no healing. Without forgiveness, there is no future." So the purpose of the story is to look the beast in the eyes. But go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say I appreciate that about the book, and I think that's the constructive information that I really want to share to make sure I get with listeners, because I think we need to be honest. What you call that beast of racism, white supremacy, we need truthful, accurate information. And in fact, I would say your book, what I said about racism, white supremacy being a system, I think your book is fantastic evidence of how that system worked on a local.
I'm sorry, I just lost you. You still there?
I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think you said local basis. Is that what you said?
I said your book shows how this system works on a local basis, meaning that this incident, and I think you summarized this. This is not just a couple of racists going out. This shows a total system where pretty much all of the white people in this community would be implicated at some level for this sort of thing to happen. Can you talk about how you had really a system of participation that was responsible for what killed these groups of black people?
Well, I first have to take some issue with your description of it being a global system. It was certainly a Southern American phenomena based upon Southern codes, coupled with the historic phenomena of lynching. Lynching is the killing of someone by extra legal means, whether it be hanging, shooting, beating, or something else. And most people do not realize that there was a period in American history from about 1880 to about 1930 when lynching was so common that it occurred on at least a weekly basis. The numbers are in the book, but it was not unusual to pick up your newspaper and notice that somebody had been burned alive or hanged in some part of the country. And congressmen debated it on the floors of Congress with Southern legislators trying to defend it, claiming that they needed to be able, for the people needed to be able to take the law into their own hands from time to time, because legal resources were inadequate otherwise. I mean, can you imagine actually defending lynching on the floor of Congress? But yet that's what occurred. And the lynching phenomena, which claimed well over 5,000 lives during this approximate 40 to 50 year period, did not end until people finally just got fed up with it. And this incident in Kirven, as the book brings out, was partly, if not largely, responsible for causing a wake up in the national psyche. The system that you're describing, as far as what happened in the Kirven area, was both an intentional, premeditated act and a mob violence, mob mentality act. The vast majority of the people who were there joined in because it was something exciting going on. A member of the community had been brutally murdered, and they were either out for revenge or just very interested in bringing the matter to concluding the matter. As we are watching the Casey Anthony trial today, that was their Casey Anthony situation. But in addition to the mob mentality, there was actually, as it's brought out in the revised edition, at least 9 men who made it their goal to see that these 3 black men were burned alive. They divided up the responsibilities. One was to obtain the wood, one was to obtain the plow to which they were tied, one was to castrate them, and they were the inner circle, the ones who did the heavy lifting, so to speak, of the lynchings. Then, in addition to that, afterwards there was a cover-up, a community cover-up, largely because some people discovered that at least 2 of the victims were completely innocent, and that the real perpetrators of the murder were going to get away scot-free. And so in that sense, yes, there was a system, and yes, it was racially motivated, but it was a phenomena that occurred all over the nation. All but 4 states in the Union experienced lynching during that period, and it was not confined to just white on black. There were many whites lynched for many purposes. Hispanics, Orientals. You can't take an incident like this and just characterize it as proving one thing and one thing only, because there is so much involved in anything similar to this.
Okay. You did say system, and as I said, I think your book points that out, where you see the police become involved in this intricately, newspapers, people ensuring that no one is going to be prosecuted for this. I mean, you really see white people function as a team, in my opinion. Your book illustrates that very well. White people working as a team to carry out this act and to, hush it up and make sure that, there were no consequences for any of the white people who were involved. I also, again, the grisly details about what happened, and I want to make sure I remind listeners, one can't really say that this is anomalous, particularly for this period of time. That really wouldn't be accurate. I've read and own a copy of 100 Years of Lynching, which you mentioned in this book, which was pivotal to you getting more information about this case. Not anomalous to this period of time in the United States, and this behavior is not anomalous to this area of the world. We've had people on from all over the world who have talked about how black people and non-white people in general have faced similar ghastly mob violence from white people. They even have some of the same terms in Australia. We've had two different guests from Australia on the program to speak to that. Another tradition of racism, white supremacy, trophies from these lynching incidents. And you talk about this extensively in the book. This is on page 70, where they talk about the Niggers' hearts, have that in quotes, that were, they were too ornery to burn, they said, because of the fiendish acts that had been committed. And I'm reading from page 70. Folding knives were pulled from the frayed pockets of overalls. The roasted organs were sliced into pieces and distributed. Tangible evidence of the stoniness of the perpetrators' souls. Something to display to grandchildren. A lasting souvenir. You go on to talk about how this may or may not have happened. There are different reports about people taking souvenirs, or reports about who took certain things. You also talk about the plow, how that became to have symbolic meaning for the town, and they were upset when it was finally taken away some years later in World War II, I believe you said. There was a scrap iron, collection, and it was mistakenly taken away. Can you talk about how, some of the relics of this event were cherished, and what that says, what that means?
Well, they were, at least for a period of time. I've heard about them, never seen any of them, don't know if any still exist. Certainly photographs exist. There was a photographer who came to the burning scene early in the morning. The burning happened probably around 2 a.m. and he showed up probably around 6 a.m. after it was over, but there was still a crowd, still a funeral pyre, and he took at least 8 photographs that were to be sold as postcards, souvenirs, and that sort. The hearts were probably actually the livers, since they were the most dense, blood-gorged organs, and it's not too uncommon, I'm told, for them to survive a fire. But there are also bits of bone and bits of chain and so forth that were supposedly carried off. One witness I interviewed said that he had dated a girl who went down to the incident and came back with a souvenir, and when he found that out, that was the last time he ever had any desire to see her. So you cannot characterize everyone in a community like that as having that kind of macabre attitude.
Again, our guest for the program, Mr. Monte Akers, Flames After Midnight. Your interview with some of these subjects, many years after these events took place, after many of these folks were quite elderly, many of them seem to still have some recollection of what happened, and seem to still be troubled by it to some degrees, even 60 years, after these events had taken place. Bertha Williams, black female that you spoke with about these events, she shared, it looks like, a lot of pivotal information with you. You said on page 92, nobody knows less than a person who thinks he knows everything. Can you chat about what happened with this interview with Miss Bertha Williams?
Certainly. She was, I believe, the second or third at the most witness that I'd interviewed. And prior to talking to her, I'd read the newspaper accounts. I had talked to essentially a member of the lynch mob, and had heard the same story over and over, and that story was that the reason that these three men were guilty of the murder of the young lady, B, the reason they had murdered her was because they were all hired hands of her family, and all had been seriously mistreated, beaten, pistol whipped, and that they committed the crime out of revenge. That was the standard accepted story. That was the story that I had no reason to, no evidence, no suspicion was incorrect when I went to interview Miss Williams. She was, as you said, in her 90s. She had both legs amputated, I believe, as a result of phlebitis. She was one of the 5 or 6 blacks that stayed in the community after everyone fled from the reign of terror. She had actually worked for the King family, the family that to which the murder victim was a member, and she had strong recollections and strong memories of the event. But there were a couple of things that made the interview very uncomfortable. One, she was being visited by some relatives from out of state, and probably grandchildren, and they did not know who I was or why I was there, and were very suspicious of my presence, and interrupted the interview a couple of times to ask questions and find out what I was doing. Secondly, she was very elderly, and she had a strong Southern accent and was very difficult for me to understand. And finally, one other point, she would tell me something, and I was tape recording it all, but I couldn't understand everything she said, and would sometimes ask a question that she had already answered, which made her rather cross and irritated with me. So essentially, I was trying to get the interview on tape and leave for her sake as well as mine, and understood her to say at one point in the interview that the men who were burned were not guilty, and that white men had actually killed Eula. And my thought at the time, being the illustration of what you just said, no one knowing less than someone who thinks he knows it all, is that, oh yes, of course, this is a story that has grown up over the years in the black community, that this is not what really happened. It's just a tale. And so I didn't really take her seriously. I asked her a few more questions about it. She gave me some answers, many of which I couldn't understand. And then I went on to discuss a different topic. And it wasn't until almost 10 years later, when I transcribed her testimony, that I realized, by playing and rewinding and replaying the tape over and over, that she had not only said white men had done it, but she had been ready and willing to tell me their names. Because what she said was that after the incident, referring to the murderers, he and Thelma left, and we never saw them again. Well, who was Thelma? And what did she mean? And that little clue, 10 years after the event, led me to a whole new series of events and information, part of which was included in the book you mentioned, 100 Years of Lynching. And so that's what that quote from the book is meant to describe.
On page 94, just wrapping up this segment with Bertha Williams, which I think is significant for many reasons. Page 94, you write, mostly, My failure, and you're talking about your failure to ask further questions and follow up and get more information. You said mostly my failure to do so was because I could not understand a lot of what she said. I was struggling to hold up my end of the interview, racking my brain to ask relevant questions, and I did not hear her mention Thelma. I also did not consider this part of her story to be credible. Did not expect her to reveal sensitive details about an old murder. Was too polite to ask her to name a white man she was accusing of murder, and did not expect her to tell me if I did ask. Also, I was a dim bulb. In reading this, and particularly hearing you describe the event to me just now and saying that you didn't really take what she was saying seriously about Thelma and this, and you thought, oh, this is just, like an urban legend that has grown up in the black community to kind of explain what happened with these events. I already know this information. I've already studied this. This sounds, I don't want you to get defensive, but I mean, this sounds pretty classic, like an example of racism. White people not really taking black people very seriously, and saying, well, I don't really think what this person is saying is credible, and I'm informed about this already. That seems like a pretty standard attitude that white people have had. What do you think?
Well, if you've read the book, you also know that my interview of J.C. Whatley, a white man, was dripping with even more doubt about his credibility. It doesn't matter what color a person is. If you think the information they are giving you is incorrect, your tendency is to discount it. And that's what I thought of both J.C. and Bertha at the time. It was later that I learned that what Bertha had told me was in fact true or based on fact. And I found that out through the discovery of a, for lack of a better term, secret agent's report, and confirmation from interviewing yet another black person who was one of those that fled the area in 1922, but came back literally to die in the 1990s.
I don't know. At least you did. It does what you write here, saying that you were a dim bulb, that you didn't ask correct questions. It does seem like you are taking some responsibility for not asking more questions, not delving a little deeper to get more information from this black female.
Exactly. I mean, in all of the interviews, white people, black people, any people, were almost without exception awkward as at the beginning. It was a subject that was not popular to be talked about. I was an outsider. I hadn't grown up in the community. And in almost every case, it took quite a while to make the person I was talking to comfortable and willing to speak openly about it. One of the least comfortable interviews, in my recollection, was the one with Bertha Williams, largely because of the suspicion that her relatives apparently felt. While you can, I think you'll find more than one example of me being self-critical. Certainly, I take responsibility for everything that's in the book, and try to point out when it is known to be questionable or probably just someone's theory or an outrageous story that has grown up over the years, because there are plenty. It's possible to gather together those stories, and it's possible to identify certain things that are reality, but no one, including myself, can actually gather together something that is clearly the truth about matters such as these.
Certainly, certainly. From building on the information that you got from Miss Bertha Williams' information, and I did want to throw in, I love that. I loved her family's suspicion. I think that's great. That's just, to protect one another, to protect your family. I love that. I think that's great that they were super suspicious of who was messing with their grandmother.
And do you think they would have been just as suspicious had I not been white?
I'm not sure, but I will say for the record, the fact that it was a white person, I think that is fantastic, and I think it's logical. We've had many white people who would say, yes, it's very logical. Given everything that's happened under conditions of white supremacy racism, yes, excellent for them to be suspicious.
Well, I have no doubt that they were, I would be suspicious, too, if someone was interviewing my grandmother. But my point is, again, that racism is a two-way street. It's disgusting wherever you find it. No matter who you are or how intelligent you are, how well educated you are, it is simply unacceptable, and there is no justification for it ever.
Context of White Supremacy. On page 109, this is your the secret investigator who went in that you found this information out as you were going along, really building off the information you got from Miss Bertha Williams. The NAACP, they sent out, I guess, a white secret agent, really. Mr. Kelly, he goes in to visit the town, Kirven, find out what happened, writes up this detailed report, which is pretty close to some of the conclusions you present in the book. Not entirely the same thing, but pretty close. I want to read a little bit and then get you to share some of how you got this information. This is page 109, a visitor from Waco, Texas. Sheriff Mayo himself said that he believed that Mose Jones was innocent. The evidence itself indicates that no more than 3 persons were engaged in the act of murdering the girl. Therefore, any way you take it, 2 of them, and this is the 2 of the 3 black males who were burned and castrated, any way you take it, 2 of them were innocent. I spoke to the people of the community, many of them. They had no particular interest in the matter that 2 innocent Negroes had been burned. Some of them even started the story. Well, I don't believe that Mose Jones was guilty, but Snap Curry wanted him to go on the trip with him. No one was moved by the fact that their guilt had not been established by the evidence. They did not seem concerned that none of them had been given a trial and a chance to establish by legal evidence his innocence. None of them seemed to be concerned that it was in any way a dishonor and a stain upon the community. In fact, the whole incident was one of which those who had engaged in it were seemingly proud. I asked one man if Mose Jones was related to any of the others. Well, he said, he was in pretty close relation to them on the night of the burning. I drove my car up in front of a gasoline station just across the street from where the burning took place. I asked, will 5 gallons take me back to Waco? The man answered, I guess so. 50 gallons took 3 niggers to hell the other night, end quotes. And so it was. The people of that community are utterly unaware of the fact that they have done any deed for which they should be ashamed. They feel no kind of conscious scruples. It is no matter of offense to their consciences that these victims may not have been guilty. They have the idea that Negroes have paid the penalty and the matter is settled as far as they are concerned. This is, again, directly from Mr. Kelly, a white person working for the NAACP in 1922. Can you talk about this report and just how you got this information?
Sure. You mentioned 100 Years of Lynching earlier, which is a collection of newspaper clippings from 1861 to 1961, focusing on lynching events, mostly racial lynching events. And when I lived in the Fairfield area, I was on the library board, and when they would have a book that they were going to throw away or sell that related to history, because they knew I loved history, they would often offer it to me or sell it to me. And one of those books was 100 Years of Lynching. And the stories are in chronological order. But when I turned to May 1922, I didn't find a story about the Kirven event. And I didn't read the book cover to cover. I read some of it and put it in a box. And it wasn't until years later, when I was in connection with transcribing the interview with Bertha Williams, that I remembered the book and thought that it might be helpful to try to find out if there had been any newspaper stories written about the event that I had not seen, because I recalled that in the book there were certain newspapers that seemed to cater to lynching stories, or they showed up as being the source of Ginsburg's collection more than others. So I thought perhaps if I would do an interlibrary loan for the copies of those newspapers for the May period when this event occurred, that I would get some of them. So I opened the book and was copying down the names of newspapers, and ran across, out of order, although only by a page or two, a story about this event in Kirven. And I got excited and went off and tried to find more information about it. Came back the next day, turned the page of this book, found yet another newspaper article about the event, sent me off in a new direction, and as if that weren't enough, came back home the next day, turned the page again, and found a reference to Dan Kelly's speech given to the NAACP at its 13th annual convention in, I believe, Newark, in which he talked about investigating the Kirven incident and his role as a undercover agent for the NAACP, and it was stunning to me, because here was a secret agent report about this story. And so I called the NAACP headquarters the next day and asked where they archived their papers, and was told it was in the Library of Congress. So I called the Library of Congress with not much hope of finding it, because the Library of Congress is huge, probably the largest library in the world, and yet, by a series of coincidences and serendipity, in that one phone call, even though the report was not indexed, was not in a collection where a person could have gone in and found it easily, I wound up finding out that it existed and having a reference librarian tell me, yes, I'll send you a copy. And it was 11 pages long, and Mr. Kelly had interviewed John King, the grandfather of the murder victim, and his statement to Kelly was, I knew who had killed Eula as soon as I realized she was dead, or words to that effect. He was convinced it was this white family that they had been feuding with, and he expressed the hope that that no innocent Negroes would be killed, but nothing that he did prevented that.
The passage that I read from his report that you quote in the book, what do you think about his assessment of the town? That you had white people didn't really think this was a problem. You had many white people who were proud. They thought that the niggers got exactly what they deserved. Do you think that's an accurate assessment?
Well, it is bound to be an accurate assessment of those people that Kelly talked to, and probably the vast majority of the population, because they all believed that the guilty parties had been executed and that they deserved to be executed. The phenomena of their dismissing their worth, their having no concern about no fair trial was certainly common to the age. But again, this was 1922, nearly 90 years ago. A lot has changed since then. I don't know. We'll never know how it would have been different had those townspeople learned that the real murderers were not the ones who were burned alive, although quite probably one of the three, Snap Curry, did play a role in Eula's murder, so that kind of complicated the ability of anyone to sort out the facts and the clues. But once the men had been burned alive, the community came together and defended what they had done, and many of them were still defending it when the book came out in 1999.
I definitely want to ask about Floyd Gibson. Wow, I definitely want to get that. But before I do, I just want to say, because you point out in the book, it seemed that a significant number of people, at minimum, felt like at least two of these black males probably didn't do anything. We probably, watched and or participated in lynching at least two people who didn't do anything. At least did not participate in murdering Miss Eula. It seems like there had to be a willful concealment, act of deception around at least two of these people to say that, I think that's in the NAACP report, that we did not do the correct thing. We can't just say that we went out and the correct thing happened, justice was served. At least two of these people were innocent, and it seemed like a significant chunk of white people knew that.
Well, part of that, I think, was on those who said they were innocent was 20/20 hindsight. At the time it happened, Snap Curry was declaring that the other two were just as guilty as he was, and that if he was going to burn, they needed to burn too. And that was all the mob needed to hear. They were convinced of Curry's guilt because he had taken off running, had found blood on his clothes, he had confessed. Whether the confession, if it was ever written down, has been lost, so we don't know exactly what he said, but even in the most sympathetic accounts to Curry, he apparently did implicate the other two men, and that was all the lynch mob needed to hear at the time to justify what they were doing. After it was over, there were various people who said, wait a minute, this doesn't sound like something Mose Jones would have done, or Johnny Cornish was simply not there. We know where he was. He was at the time in the company of a white doctor, so at the time of the murder. So he was innocent, and it wasn't until years, that was one of the burning mysteries of the story. Why did Snap Curry implicate those other two black men? What motivated him to do so? And it wasn't until years later that I after the book came out that I found out why he probably did.
Second strongest motivating force in the known universe that causes us a lot of problems, generally speaking.
yeah, one of them. Yeah, and let's let the listeners wonder what that is, so maybe they'll go buy the book to find out.
I'm with that. It's constructive information in the book. I'm with that. I will say, Floyd Gibson. But if any reason that you need to read this book, Floyd Gibson. You should remember that name. Write it down. Floyd Gibson. Mr. Kelly, I will quote the special agent white man who did the report for the NAACP. He put it very succinctly. The race problem is not going to be solved by white people. Enter Floyd Gibson. Could you please share some of the information about Floyd Gibson and his, I would say, heroic role in all this?
Yes, it was a heroic role, and the interview in which I found out about him, or found out more detail about him, was probably the most memorable of all that I experienced when writing the book. Lutetia Gibson Foreman, at the time of my research, was in her 80s, and she was bedfast and was living in Simsboro, Texas, which is a small, isolated community that was founded after the Civil War by recently freed blacks. And she had not told the story. She was, I believe, 8 or 9. I don't remember, but a young girl when the incident occurred, and she witnessed the murder of her brother and her uncle by a white mob that was part of this reign of terror. And yet she had never told the story, or at least her children had never heard the story, and so they gathered around, all of them being middle-aged adults by then. They gathered around during the interview when she told me what she saw, and we were on the site of where it had happened, and so when she motioned out the window and said, "We saw them coming across that field. We saw the sun glinting off of their rifles," referring to the gang of white men or lynch mob. You could imagine exactly what it looked like. And the mob, and it wasn't a large mob, it was probably no more than 15 or 20 people, were looking for Lutetia's brother. He had gone into Kirven, supposedly deceased girlfriend, and somebody had tried to arrest him, and he had escaped but had been shot in the leg and had walked from Kirven to Simsboro, which is about 9 miles, and walked to the home of his grandparents. And that home was up on a hill about 300 yards from where Letitia lived, and the mob was looking for him, and they went up to that house on the hill, the grandparents' house, went inside, brought him out, laid him down on the ground, and shot him. Shot him and shot him and shot him. As Letitia said, they shot him to doll rags. And then they went back in the house, and there were Floyd Gibson and his brother inside. And as soon as the mob left, the grandmother stood up to them and said, "You're not going to hurt anybody else in my family," and essentially convinced them to leave. And as soon as they did leave, Floyd's brother grabbed the rifle and ran outside, intending to run down to Letitia's house, where the rest of the family was, to make sure they were okay. but one of the members of the mob was waiting for him and shot him as he came out. And then the mob was essentially leaving, and Floyd Gibson, who was a World War I veteran, came out, picked up his brother's rifle, laid down on the ground, and began shooting, and killed at least 2 members of the mob and caused them all to run away. And although that incident brought matters to a head in that a large white mob showed up at the edge of town the next day, the black community rallied and got their guns, got their shotguns and their rifles, and hid out along the road as Foreman, Foster Foreman, Letitia's husband, said, who was also there. There would be one bunch of us behind this group of bushes, and a few dozen yards down the road, another bunch. They were ready for an all-out race war, but it didn't happen. Cooler heads prevailed. The Texas Rangers showed up, and they managed to avert what was nearly a race war, after which the white community kind of came to its senses and held a big rally and declared that no more violence would be tolerated. Floyd fled to Washington State, and lived the rest of his life up there. But yes, he should be remembered as being a hero.
There should be statues. I mean, Floyd Gibson, and I'm in Washington State. I thought that was quite funny reading the book. Yeah, and I was born in Lynchburg, Virginia. I had so many ironies.
There you go.
Reading your book. It's wow. I want to give Bertha Williams the last line on Floyd Gibson. I think this is outstanding. As Bertha Williams opined wistfully at the end of her interview in Kirven 65 years later, they were coming after them, but none of these people here, they were so cowardly all over the land. If they'd been like Floyd Gibson, it wouldn't have lasted half as long. Bertha Williams, outstanding. You also, and I thought this was really important as well, one of the victims who was burned, cut, mutilated, Mr. Johnny Cornish, you go into detail with regards to why this man, who was one of the ones innocent, white people pretty much knew. If they didn't know at the time they killed him, they knew soon afterwards. This is one of the people who probably didn't do anything with regards to murdering Miss Eula. This is on page 91 of your book. I want to read a little bit and then get you to share some of why Johnny Cornish had so much vitriol, why he aroused so much vitriol from the local white people. This is on page 191. Even though none of them may have been present, the King family preserved and passed down the recollection that Curry was unrepentant to the end, saying that nothing the mob could do to him would hurt him as much as he and his companions had hurt Eula. Grady, who said the wood was stacked on all sides of Curry to a level even with the seat, did not hear any such comments from Curry, whom he said did not scream or cry out, but only sang a little song. Kerosene was poured and a match was applied. The flames engulfed the doomed man, covering him entirely for a few seconds, then subsided enough to reveal that he still sat erect on the plow seat. A member of the mob called out, "Burn! That's the way you made her suffer." Grady stated that he could see Curry clearly, and that as the flames did their damage, he witnessed a horrible and macabre detail of the affair. Curry's scalp split, he said, and the skin of his head and face fell away and onto his shoulders like a woman's hair. revealing a white, upright skull. It was more than Grady could stomach. He went home immediately, before either of the other two men were killed. Thereafter, he was unable to eat anything for 2 or 3 days, although the event was not spoken of later. It remained a vivid memory, and in later years, he was unable to kill any sort of animal, even insects, due to the impact the scene had upon him. When asked 80 years later what the message of the event would be if he could convey it to the world, he said, "Don't even watch nothing like that. Don't. I wouldn't see another one like that if they paid me." Cornish and Jones' denials of guilt, of course, fell on deaf, unsympathetic ears, and the core group of the mob selected the next victim, Cornish. In addition to being too pretty and light complexion for the comfort of local white men, Cornish made it easier to be hated by making a statement about the private parts of white girls that was so disgusting I can't repeat it, according to Mac, who still would not do so 80 years later. He would say only that what Cornish said just made us mad. This is consistent with the account offered by Foreman Carter, who reported that Johnny's nasty mouth was one of the reasons he was put on the fire. Can you share some of the details about Mr. Cornish and why he upset these white people?
Well, Johnny was a young man, 19 or 20, and apparently a very nice-looking young man, and obviously a feisty, proud individual, and he apparently had a reputation for being a ladies' man, and had been known to have both black and white girlfriends, and in southern and eastern Texas in 1922, that was a dangerous thing. That was certainly enough to cause him to have a lot of white enemies just based on that alone. But then, in addition, I mean, supposedly, one of the accounts that I was told was that after Snap Curry had been burned, that they seized the next man, and it's not clear whether it was Johnny or Mose, but when they got Johnny up into the firelight where they could see him and see who he was, several people apparently called out, "That's Bud Thompson's boy." Bud Thompson was a white man who had a white family and a black family, and Johnny was his son. And Bud Thompson had been a respected member of the community. He was then deceased. But supposedly, when they saw it was him, some of the members of the mob said, "Don't burn him. He's supposedly Johnny cussed him out, and I don't know whether he really said something insulting regarding Eula's private parts, or whether that was just another version of it. But he told them what he thought, and they said, "Oh, just put him on the fire." I mean, it's conceivable that had he been repentant and curbed his tongue, that they might not have killed him, but that's not what occurred.
Just to add a few details of what did occur, and then I want to get some information on Mac, and then we'll see if anyone, the callers, have questions. What did occur, this is on page 192, a reporter, or what is reported to have occurred, a reporter for the Corsicana Daily Sun was either present or had access to witnesses who spoke to no other newspaper, as his article contained more gruesome detail than did other papers. He wrote of Cornish that as a fish flops when it hits dry land, his body writhed and flopped from the fire. Again into the blazing pier he was thrown, and again he escaped. Finally, the newspaper reported one of the mob struck him in the head and threw him again atop the blazing mass, where he died, still protesting his innocence. This detail is described incorrectly in the first edition of Flames After Midnight as the act of Otis King striking Mose Jones with a radius rod and knocking out one of his eyes. What actually occurred, Mack reported, was that Cornish was struck not by Otis King, but by Claude Prowell, and not with a radius rod, but with an axe handle. As for the effect of the blow, Mack observed that it left Cornish's eye just dangling like Jones' cock, and this is in quotes. The person who delivers this quote, you changed the name to Mack. He alleges to be one of the participants in this lynching of the three males, Curry, Cornish, and Jones, May 5th, 1922. Grisly details. I want to read a little bit, and then if you could share some information about this man. This is on page 214. I do a lot of research on racism, white supremacy, and I might be angry. Reports like this are enough to make, I think, anyone angry or squeamish or something. This is on page 214, and I'm assuming you are transcribing what was related to you from a gentleman, Mr. Goad, who had done an interview with Mack. I'm just reading. This is on 214. This is part of the revised edition to Flames After Midnight. And this is Mr. Goad speaking. After my rather frightening visit to Mack's residence in 2002, I was very surprised when he began calling me late at night in September 2002. I received 6 calls from him, all made from his home, I assume, during that month. One call was not substantive, as his son or one of his family members went to the bathroom and was awake, so he had to hang up. The other 5 calls kept me up way into the wee hours and were often disturbing enough that I was worthless the following day. He said that he wanted to talk about the nigger lynching and that he was a very old man and his family didn't want to know anything about it. The photos were on his bedroom wall in the back of his bed because I always want to remember it, he said. In the first and second calls, I tried to ask journalism 101 type questions just to ascertain if he was telling the truth as he remembered it. His memory was very good, better than Hobart Carter's, in fact. He was born in 1902 and was a century old when we spoke. Initially, he seemed to show little remorse. He spoke of working on a pig farm in the area towards Waco and of learning to castrate pigs there. This meant he had a skill to impress the others who were leaders of the mob. About 8 men and 1 boy of 14, he said. 14, he said. The boy was also a farm worker, and like Mack, had the skill of knowing how to castrate a pig, which wasn't that much different from doing a nigger, he said, especially a bad nigger. So Mack told me that all 3 victims were castrated, but he only did 2 of them. The boy did the other, he told me. Another lyncher, a man of about 40, whom he still wouldn't identify after 80 years had passed, even though the 40-year-old had to have been deceased, was in charge of getting the fire going. A knife was used to painfully cut Snap Curry in the pectoral muscle of the chest. As he screamed, and again, the style of the cuts had something to do with farm labor. Johnny Cornish was cut in his pretty face, as he was particularly despised. He was considered by people in the area to be a miscegenation threat, according to Mac. Nobody was surprised that Johnny Cornish was involved. He says that he knew Tom Cornish better, worked with him doing farm and tree work, and that he was better behaved, and it was a shame that he too got killed. In the third call, I asked him what made him do the castrating. In quotes, I was showing off, proving that I was good enough so that people would respect me. He admitted, in those days, young fellows had to prove they were men. I also asked him in that call why he decided to speak to me, a complete stranger. Because you are a stranger, he said, and it's never left me what we did that night. By the fourth and fifth calls, as I said, one call was abbreviated, he became sadder sounding and more wistful, if not exactly remorseful. I give all the niggers a lot of extra peaches, he said, and none of them know that I was even there. This is Mr. Akers writing. The other details of the man's involvement, how 8 men and a boy, 14-year-old boy, were assigned specific duties they carried out to burn the 3 men, and what those duties consisted of, were provided in other messages from Goad and are described in Section 2 of this epilogue. Of the disturbing events and shocking testimony I've encountered in 29 years of association with this bizarre, horrible tale, I consider this man's testimony to be the most chilling. He was the consummate American lyncher. He hated, he participated in an utterly fiendish way, and he took pride in what he had done. Could you share some thoughts on this gentleman, Mac?
Certainly, and what you've read is, without a doubt, the most repugnant, grisly part of the tale. His existence came to my attention after the book came out, and I was told that he was live, but that I shouldn't try to interview him because his family was protective of him and believed that someone might still try to prosecute him after all these years. But I was also contacted by Goad Davis, who's a filmmaker from Rhode Island. And as an aside, I encourage any of your listeners to go to www.americanlynching.com, which is Goad's website for his documentary, which unfortunately has never been completed and sold to a television network, but he's put years and years into the story. Anyway, when Goad Davis came to Texas to film part of his documentary, part of it focusing on the Kirven incident, and I told him about Mac's existence, he immediately tracked him down and asked him if he could interview him, which he did, and said that sure enough, his son or son-in-law, Max, that is, had a Winchester rifle leaning against the door jamb and wasn't at all friendly, but that Mac talked to him in Mac's bedroom, and that there were 6 framed photographs of the Kirven lynching incident on his wall. But that at the time, he didn't really tell Goad anything different or new than what we had heard elsewhere. And it wasn't until Goad got back to Rhode Island that Mac began calling him and telling him more detail. In the meanwhile, I had essentially lost contact or was not in frequent communication with Goad anymore, and so it wasn't until I was getting ready to compile the epilogue that I talked to him again and found out the story that you've just read parts of. It comes to me third hand, second hand. It's hearsay. I can't substantiate the truthfulness of it. But like so much of the book, it is presented for the purpose of preservation and for the reader to consider as to whether it is accurate and truthful. And I'll make one comment also. The book obviously names names in most cases, but here we have the one who, of all the people involved, would seemingly be the most guilty and the least deserving of protection. But the reason he's not named by name in the book is because there was another man living in the same county with the exact same name. He was not as elderly as Mac, but was still quite old, and it would have been inappropriate and possibly leading to legal liability had High used his real name, because he would have been so easily confused with the other man who was not guilty of those same acts. Mac is dead now, and the reference to the peaches, Freestone County has a lot of peach orchards, and apparently he must have operated one of the roadside stands. That was his reference to giving away peaches. But it's, his calm description of that horrific acts is just chilling. We still walk among people like this. The genocide that has occurred in other countries demonstrates that all of us are capable of savage acts that we don't know we're capable of and would not be expected to perform in a civilized society, but yet they occurred then and can potentially occur again.
Context of White Supremacy. Again, the revised edition of Flames After Midnight, Mr. Monte Akers. If you have questions for the folks that are listening out there, if you have questions about any of the information that you've heard, if you are on the TalkShoe line, press *8 and I can get your hand. If you're on the free HD line, it's *6. And I'll see that you have a hand. I can get you if you have any questions. Justice, if you have any questions, your line should be open as well. Feel free.
Seems like we either answered their questions or put them to sleep.
Oh, okay, there we go. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. My question is, why do you think black people don't often talk about this incident?
Why do black people so often not talk about this kind of incident? Was that your question? Was that the question?
I'm sorry?
Was your question, why do black people not talk about this kind of incident? I'm okay. Well, because it was so horrific, and for so many years, even talking about it was dangerous. The many black people living in the United States during the pre-1970 or pre-civil rights period lived under a Southern Code situation whereby they were left alone and able to have lives, normal lives, if you want to call it that, only so long as they abided by those Southern codes, which included not being accusatory, not being retaliatory for the injustices that had been visited upon them over the decades, and it was also not a pleasant subject. It was, people dealt with enough misery and heartache in their day-to-day life that they didn't want to go home and have a conversation over the dinner table about something as horrible as this. They would prefer to find things to lighten their spirits rather than remind them of how bad it could be. But the story was not talked about in Freestone County when I was there. It was literally whispered to me the first time I heard anything about it. Black people didn't want to talk about it because of what it had done to them. White people didn't want to be associated with it either. It's only now that we should be able to talk intelligently and about these kinds of incidents and analyze them as we're doing today, and deal with them, look the beast in the eyes, so that nothing like this ever happens again.
Why do you think these white people did the mistreating to these innocent black people?
Why do I think the white people mistreated the innocent black people? Was that the question?
Yes. Why did the
they thought initially they thought that the three men who were burned alive had committed the murder, and the murder was savage. The victim was sexually assaulted. She was stabbed 30 times. Her throat was cut. Her tongue was cut out. Her face was beaten into the earth, and they took a stick and savaged her with it sexually. And so they were outraged initially. So that was the first explanation. But then that should have been the end of it, and it wasn't. And I was told by more than one white person that lived there that a lot of the so-called reign of terror that happened afterwards was by non-Freestone County residents. It was as if people who wanted to do this sort of thing saw the opportunity to go somewhere and act out their brutal racism. It was just an excuse to do it. And understand, this was the 1920s when the Ku Klux Klan was a powerful political organization. It wasn't just a lunatic fringe hate group like it is now. It was a political group that attempted to present themselves as Bible-fearing or Bible-thumping, God-fearing patriots, and it was way too commonplace for people to lash out at innocents merely because of the color of their skin.
Are most of your readers white people?
I really can't say. There was one book signing in Freestone County, and it was attended probably predominantly by black people. The only business in the entire county that was willing to sell the book was operated by a black business person. Over the years since the book's come out, I'd say I've had an equal amount of interest, black and white.
When white people mistreat non-white people, what are some of the best things non-white people can do to get help?
Well, initially, it's assuming it's not a situation where you can be injured by doing it, I would say stand up to any bully. Anybody that exercises racism, whether it's verbally or some other way, is not going to have the support of the majority of other people. In my opinion, the people who are overtly racist today are, I'll use the word again, the lunatic fringe. And yeah, they can get together in groups and they can be pretty scary. But if a black person, if I were a black person who encountered racism in my daily life, my first step would be to confront it heads up. If somebody called me something, I would try to tell them in as calm and firm a voice as I could that was inappropriate and that it was not going to be tolerated and that it had best not be repeated. And I think that same message is more important for white people who hear that said. It's not unusual for a person who has racial tendencies or bigoted or just plain old-fashioned to think that it's okay to talk to another white person about bigotry and to say things that are inappropriate or racist. And so many white people will just let it happen. They don't want to make waves. They don't want to make somebody angry. But I think it's critical that anytime a person of any color, but particularly a white person, hearing a racial comment by another white person, needs to let it be known that is simply not acceptable under any theory.
How can the system of racism, white supremacy, be stopped?
By working within the system, by getting educated, by being elected to public office, by supporting candidates who are not going to allow that sort of thing to continue, by holding office, by being a role model, by telling other people when their behavior is inappropriate, and just living the life and demonstrating that you're living the life that any right-thinking person knows is what is intended. And, we currently have, in my opinion, the most effective leader in the White House that we have had in my lifetime, and I'm 61 years old. And I believe he will be remembered as one of our truly great presidents. And yet, there are, as you probably know, so many internet and email messages and hate talk and jokes that can only be attributed to racism and bad taste, that ignore all that he has accomplished or is capable of accomplishing just because of skin color. Yes, there's also a lot of politics involved too, and that transcends mere racism. But some of the jokes that get circulated around on the internet can only be described as racist and low-minded, and I can't imagine there's any other excuse for it.
I don't have any more questions for you at this time.
Thank you.
See, the folks, again, if you're on the TalkShoe line, if you called in and you have a question, *8. If you are on the Free HD line and you have a question, it's *6. And I can get you in. I did want to ask, I'm not sure if this information was in the original edition, but I know when I read the revised edition, you talk about there is evidence that suggests the Prowls, these are the white family that evidence suggests they were feuding with the King family, the white woman that was murdered in the King family. You have evidence in the book that suggests that the Prowls might have participated in both the murder of the white woman, Eula King, as well as participated in the lynching. That is astounding. Am I getting that information correct from the book?
Yeah, it's almost it's so hard to accept and hard to believe that anybody could be that Machiavellian, but it does appear that the true murderers were either a pair of brothers or a pair of brothers and their father, white, who lived on a farm adjoining that of the Kings, who had gotten crosswise with them years earlier and had actually been in a physical fight with them at one time, either a knife fight or one involving other tools, weapons, that the Kings had essentially run them out of the county, but that they had vowed to get even and had, in fact, hired Snap Curry because he was a hired hand that Eula knew, to stop her horse as she was riding home from school. And once that was done, they came out of the brush and pulled her from the saddle and murdered her. And so that was the startling revelation in the first edition of the book, because it was simply not the commonly accepted story. And yet, once I started looking into it, I found support for it, at least verbal, at least other people's opinions, at least stories that other people had heard. Then, after the book came out, it was the Mac incident, the Mac phone calls to go to Davis, in which he identified the primary organizer of the mob as one of those white men who had apparently killed Eula. So that you have a situation where not only did they commit the murder, but they committed the racial lynching murders and got away with it. And that's terribly hard to believe. But yet, talking to the descendants of the King family, their recollection was that they first thought the Prowls had done it, but that the Prowls explained their presence away by claiming that they were moonshining. This was during Prohibition days, and there was a great deal of illegal moonshining, that was the reason they were there. And then they made the comment that if we were going to make war on your family, the King family, we would never make war on the women. We would only make war on the menfolk. Well, that, well, I believe was patently untrue, resonated with the King family, with the brothers, and they accepted that explanation. Of course, by the time they heard him say that, the 3 black men had already been burned alive, and nobody wanted to stand up and say, oops, sorry, we made a mistake. They preferred, or at least they demonstrated that they preferred to cover up the involvement of the white men, who were told apparently to get out of the county and never come back, as a result of which one of them, this man who was supposedly the leader of the lynch mob, went, as did Floyd Gibson, to Washington State, which was interesting. I was able to trace what became of them. They came back to Freestone, not Freestone County. They came back to Texas, and one of them settled down in an adjoining county, and another one in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But what was particularly ironic about them, one more irony heaped upon ironies, is that the grave of Eula, the murder victim, is about 15 feet away from 4 graves of that family. In other words, when she was buried, when Eula's funeral occurred in May of 1922, the grandfather of her murderers was buried just a few feet away, and would have been a visible grave from the side of her grave. And subsequently, her grandmother was buried next to the grandfather, and chances are Eula's murderers attended that funeral and were able to gaze upon Eula's headstone just a few feet from that of her family. This story is filled with little ironies, and that's one of them.
Context of white supremacy. I hope people, don't miss. Yes, you have a horrific lynching of 3 black males, castration. This went on, as he said, for nearly a month, and who knows how many black people were killed. There are reports upwards of 20 black people. Some even go high. Again, at this time, it wasn't really that strange for a black person to disappear, and who cares? A black person is lynched, who cares? That really wasn't anomalous in 1922 in this area of the world. So who knows? But this went on. There were many victims, many black people murdered, injured, lost their property, forced to flee for their lives, hiding in the swamp. This is it's a really disgusting episode. And just to fast forward, keeping that in mind, fast forward, I guess as a result of this book coming out and people talking about these events, apparently, just as it was the case in Jasper, Texas, the cemetery still divided, white on one side, black on the other. After the lynching of James Byrd Jr., the fence came down. You write about the fence, in this case, stayed up. You write on page 212, the fence between the black and white cemeteries in Cotton Gin did not come down. Despite a letter-writing campaign, one newspaper article, local efforts by the daughters of Letitia and Foster Foreman and David McCartney, the initial support of Clara King, the fact that a similar fence was torn down in Jasper as a symbol of racial healing, and an appeal to the Cotton Gin Cemetery Association Board of Directors. It stands to this day. Its removal would have been a minor but tangible symbol of racial healing in the region that has not come to pass. Discussions and tentative proposals regarding the possible erection of a monument to the victims of the Kirven incident also died barren. I guess you did say in the beginning we still have work to do.
We still have work to do. There's been a little bit of progress on that subject in that the family of Johnny Cornish, led by a lady named Betty Cochran and another named Mary Helen Malone, have erected a headstone to his memory in the Fairfield Cemetery, and it was attended with a fairly large ceremony back in May of 2008, I believe. It might have been 2009. And the Texas Historical Commission has agreed to erect a historical marker to the incident, although that has not yet come to pass. So, there's some gradual recognition, and certainly I've met plenty of people in Freestone County or from Freestone County who thanked me for telling the story, or demonstrated that it was high time that the tale be told. And most of those who were resistant were elderly or strong-minded about those subjects, and were not going to accept my writing the book about it, or accuse me of trying to make money at their expense. And so as time goes by, as the release of the revised version demonstrates, I think there is more and more willingness to confront and deal with this horrible topic, and hopefully put an end to racism once and for all. Although, as one lady said, times are going to change, but it's going to take a lot of dying.
Context of White Supremacy. I do see someone with a hand up. I will double check to see if they have a question. Person who called in, guest 14, did you have a question for Mr. Akers? Person who called in, guest 14, did you have a question for Mr. Akers? Okay, I will assume they are just listening. If you have a quick question, better act quickly. *8 if you're on TalkShoe. The free HD line, it's *6. We have about 2 minutes left. *8 if you have a question. That's TalkShoe. Do you think it's credible, the information that you got, different reports where white people suggested that, easily there could have been 25 black people killed during, these weeks of terrorism or more? Do you think those reports are accurate?
Well, the difficulty is in part that so many people were fleeing or leaving the country, so that if somebody disappeared, it was unknown as to whether they had left of their own free will or in fact become a victim. There are, I think the total for verifiable deaths was 7. But I've heard, the sheriff of a neighboring county said there was probably 20 or 30. I've heard it said that there could have been as many as 50, but the stories like that are going to be exaggerated. One is too many, and it was at least 7.
Wow. I will check again. The person, guest 14, did you have a question? Guest 14?
Hello?
Did you have a question, sir?
Yes, I do. How many blacks are in the prison system right now?
I'm not capable of answering that question.
You don't know why? Why they
Why?
in the prison?
We have some white people. I believe they are racist, blatant, explicit racists, and they call in to be disruptive every now and then. We still have work to do. See, I don't see hands. I don't see hands. I'll assume folks are just listening. Again, the book, Flames After Midnight, Murder, Vengeance, and the Desolation of a Texas Community. This is the revised edition. If I read the original copy of the book just to get the information about Mac, what he had to say, and it's been 80 years, more than 80 years since this incident, and he apparently still had the photographs. Proudest day of his life, he said. Highlight of his life, he said. Yeah, incredible information, very constructive, and I think just shows a really hideous side of racism, white supremacy. Still work to be done. Thank you so much for sharing a bit of your afternoon with us, Mr. Akers. Thoroughly enjoyed the book.
You're quite welcome.
Take care, sir.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Context of White Supremacy. And I again want to point out the folks at the racists who comment and listen in to the program. Great deal of time and energy. I think 909 commented on that the other day about having that much time and energy to tune in and do recon on a program, particularly if black people are so ignorant and inferior. He's called in again. At any rate, keep in mind what 909 said on the previous program about these folks. And again, I would just say make sure you're using your time and energy in the most constructive manner. As you see, white people stay on their job 24/7. They do not take breaks or vacations. Be active. Be constructive. Be active. With that said, we already took our break. We have a program on July 5th. Dr. Robert Wintersmith. He'll be on the program. He is the author of Police and the Black Community. Police and the Black Community. Talks about, basically, he's saying the foundation for the police departments in this area of the world is slavery, racism, white supremacy. Very thorough research. He kind of goes through and I think he starts by saying he was researching the history of police departments and he knew the information was incorrect because he knew that white people have always patrolled black people in this area of the world. So he knew that as soon as pretty much from the time black people were here that you had to have some sort of enforcement apparatus. And he just goes from there. He gives history on different terms and how they relate to racism, white supremacy. Very informed. Looking forward to having him on the program. July 5th. July 5th. The program, I believe it'll be in the morning. I have to double check, but it should be in the morning. I guess if you're on the East Coast, it'll be early afternoon. I think 1 p.m. For people on the East Coast, 12 p.m. Central, and 10 a.m. Pacific will be the program time. That's Tuesday, July 5th. A listener just recommended him about a month or so ago, and I was able to get him on the program. He seems a lot less confused, so should be constructive. See, Justice, if you are there, if you have a news report, that would be cool.
I do have a news report, but it's a video. There's like there's like one sentence, but pretty much it's just a video. It's 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Gus, if you could play that, that would be great. Is that okay?
What's the video?
Oh. Well, it's on racism. It's on racismdaily.com. It was posted on today of this year, and the title is South Carolina Club Owner Responds to Racism Claims. But you're going to have to watch it on YouTube because it's a disabled request, or it doesn't play on here.
Do you have any thoughts on today's broadcast, Mr. Akers?
Just like at the beginning, because I knew he was racist, because, I have concluded that all white people are racist. So, well, even though if he says, I'm not racist, I'm a white person that has black friends, I'm okay. I still think he's racist. So, but, it is suspected for white people to say I'm not racist.
Denial. That is to be expected. I think that I just said that yesterday. I think the understanding that you have about white people, like, I don't care if this white person has black friends. I don't care if they, admit that racism exists. I don't care if they're nice. I don't care if they want to give me things. If the person is white, they're racist. Period. Nothing to discuss, no confusion. Like, that is, man, if we could get more non-white people to have that understanding, you look at your watch. Just look at your watch. You can start counting down. That would change everything. That would be that fundamental shift in our understanding. That is brilliant. I wish we could get more victims to get that grasp of white people. But yeah, he got very upset. He got very upset about your accusation.
If non-white people stop copying white people, I think the white people would be scared, running away. Not like they will be uncomfortable if non-white people would stop copying white people and doing what the white people do.
I totally agree. Yeah, definitely. So, he's a white person. I definitely think he said many things I didn't agree with. Were there other things that he said that you felt where you suspected he was practicing white supremacy?
He did say, like, other races, which, I know that there's no other races besides the white race. I can't think of anything else. Yeah.
I know he said more than once. He said that non-white people can be racist too. I thought that anytime a white person does that, I suspect that they are consciously practicing racism. I think you have to be really stupid. You have to be incredibly stupid to think that, or to say or to think that a non-white person can be racist under these conditions. You have to, and I mean to say that to a black person, you have to be either incredibly stupid or incredibly racist. And he is the partner for a law firm. I don't think he's very stupid.
Sure, non-white people can be racist, sure.
And that too, that's got to be bedrock too. You got to have that in mind. Non-white people cannot in any way, shape, or form be racist. Like, I don't care what anyone has to say. White person, non-white person, like, that is just bedrock. We're in a system of white supremacy. To be a racist, you have to be white. White means racist. Non-white people cannot, under any circumstances, be racist. And that's tied exactly to what you said from the beginning. There's only one race, the white race. You got to be a member of a race to practice racism, white supremacy. And I always remember Dr. Joy DeGruy. She has a great example. It's not, you talk about codification. Anyone ask, do white people harm large groups of non-white people? Oh yeah. Let's name the ways. You'll fill up a whole chalkboard of ways. Then ask, can black people harm large groups of white people? You should hear crickets every time. Every time.
Agreed.
I'm trying to think. He said some other things too that I felt where he was the part where Bertha Williams, I still feel that is standard racism. The part where this black female, 90 years old, both legs amputated, and she's giving him all the beans. She's giving him all the information, and he said he didn't think her story was credible. He couldn't understand her. He thought he knew this information already. That's standard racism. That standard paternalistic white supremacist attitude. These dumb black people don't know anything. I know it all. I can't understand what they're saying. They don't speak proper English. That's standard. I've heard that like 50 billion times. He said he denied that too. He said that wasn't racist. He had white people that he felt the same way about. Yeah, you can make your own conclusions. Yeah. Oh, I have your report, the club owner responding to racism. Are you ready for me to play it?
Yep.
Okay, no.
Yep.
We'll play it. This is club owner responds to racism.
First tonight, that fight in Spartanburg that led to accusations of racism.
A black city councilman and a white nightclub owner are in the middle of this controversy, and News 4's John Eby is on the story for us tonight. John, how did all this start?
Well, according to police reports, the son of Councilman Robert Reeder Sr. was turned away from Club Rome last night. Police say the fight started when the councilman came and accused the club owner of racial profiling. Now the owner is defending himself as more people come forward with the same claim.
There is no racism here. There never has been.
Club Rome owner Joe Wells is answering claims from Spartanburg City Councilman Robert Reeder Sr. The accusations led to a fight early Friday morning.
Mr. Reeder, I'm Judge Ashmore.
According to police reports, Robert Reeder Jr. called his dad to the club after he wasn't allowed in. Wells says Reeder Jr. was refused because his friends didn't meet the dress code. According to police reports, Councilman Reeder accused Wells of racial profiling. At some point, police say the Reeders got in a fight with club security, leading to charges against Reeder Jr. But the fight has led to more people claiming they were turned away from Rome because of race.
I have never been made to feel so less of a person in my entire life.
Brittany Toole says she came to the club in April to meet a group of white friends. She says she and her friend Marshallane Ricks were both turned away and told they were not on the list. She says she texted her white friends inside to ask what was going on.
I get a text message back that says, Brittany, there is no list. I don't know what you're talking about.
You're not going to get us on. And a YouTube video posted last April also suggests that Rome discriminates against blacks. Wells has responded to the accusations by posting 20 pictures of black patrons on Facebook.
We hope that the community will come out and we'll take a look at our pictures on Facebook and all and see the type of patrons we have inside the facility and make a judgment that we're not racist. We never have been and we never will be.
Pictures that have come too late for Toole.
He can do whatever he wants to do from this point forward, but it doesn't change my view of him.
Because this case involves a city councilman, the investigation has been turned over to the State Law Enforcement Division to remove any perception of impartiality. Councilman Reeder has declined to comment on what happened.
Did she say white friend? I almost want to rewind that. Did you hear that? Did she say my white friend inside?
Yep. Probably about 3 times.
Lord, have mercy. Yep. I wanted to rewind. Like, wait a minute. My white friend. Lord, we're losing. You don't have white friends. That is the word. Those are the two worst words in the English language to put together. White and friends. Like, oh, it gives me a headache. Oh God! Like, I don't even want to hear white people say that they have white friends. Like, woo, man, oh man. I almost don't even need to hear anything else. When I hear a victim say, "My white friend," like you can just, oof, this is gonna end bad. Do you have any other thoughts on what you heard in the report?
They did say the word community a few times.
That Rome discriminates against.
That's my fault.
It's okay. They did say the word community a few times. In Mr. Fuller's word guide, it says, I think, do not use the word community. I'm trying to look it up now, but yeah, and also, like at the beginning, a person, well, I think it was a white person, and he said, there is no racism, there's no such thing, I never heard of it, yeah. And I'll look up that word community in a second.
My white friend. Yeah, the denial. I thought that was great. I was when he said that. They put the pictures. They put the pictures. I was like, we just talked about that. I don't care how many pictures you put up on Facebook. I wouldn't care if you get them to come sign a petition and they make a video. I would not care. They could come out and say, you know, he is the best white person we've ever met in the universe. I don't care. System of racism, white supremacy. This is a white person. That's all I need to know. Thank you. Thank you.
I found it in the word guide. Yeah. And I think he also said community standards too. So I'll read both. These two, these two terms are on page 62 in Mr. Fuller's word guide. Community. Avoid using this word. When others use it, ask for a detailed explanation that you can easily understand. It has a bunch of questions that can be helpful. The next term, community standards. Avoid using this term. When others use this term, ask for a detailed explanation that you can easily understand. It has a bunch of questions too that can be helpful. I've read the word community in Mr. Fuller's word guide a lot, and every time like when somebody used that term, I always think, okay, well, Mr. Fuller says avoid using the word, so I always keep that in mind when somebody uses that word.
When white people use it, I just assume that they are talking about the white community, meaning the system of white supremacy. So, yeah, I'm cool with white. I keep that in mind when they say it. That's what they're talking about. When a white person says the community standards, I assume that they mean the white supremacist standards. Very interesting. Yep, just talked about that yesterday. I had a victim who was saying that having a white friend nearly cost them their life, which I'm sure many victims can testify to that. We could do I'm snickering, but that is really not funny. Like even just thinking about it, I think I could name at least 3 or 4 different times that I have heard stories where someone, because they had a quote-unquote white friend, it nearly cost them their life. I can think of at least 3 different stories that I'm sure we could do a whole program that could easily take up 3 hours, where everybody who's had a white friend could think of at least one time, man, my life could have went drastically different. Just, having contact with this white person. Yeah. I'll leave that there. At any rate, I'll share, because I think that's something else. I'll give out a suggestion. Just with the not gossiping, I think it is best. I think if you're going to reveal stories, I try not to call out other people by name, and I'm even cautious around giving out details around incidents, just because you never know. It can be tough. Nobody really wants to reveal how embarrassing it is to be a victim of white supremacy. So I try to be very cautious about giving out, all the details of what happened, unless it's myself. Like, if you're going to give out details about, how disgraceful things are under racism and white supremacy, if you start with yourself, that's always great. And it's good. I think it's super helpful for other victims to hear. It just makes it much more comfortable for people who hear that to know it's not just me. I'm not the only one that white people are just stomping on. I think it's super helpful, and I think that's just a part of that process of us becoming more comfortable being uncomfortable and solving this problem. So I'll give one of my incidents of when I was super confused. Let me see. I had not read Mr. Fuller's book. I don't even think I'd heard any. I hadn't heard any of his lectures or anything. I think I just knew of his name loosely, and I was familiar with Dr. Welsing's work. I was familiar with Dr. Welsing, and I'll say again, Mr. Fuller says explicitly in his book, no sex with white people. He gives the explanation why. Dr. Welsing does not. It's not a criticism. It's just the difference that I've noted in what I think my behavior changed a lot just because Mr. Fuller said that explicitly. And actually, when I first realized that, it made me kind of sad that things need to be spelled out in that manner. But I mean, that's where we are. That's where we are. I hadn't read Mr. Fuller. I'd read Dr. Welsing. And I was very confused about white supremacy. I had many quote-unquote white friends. I worked with a ton of white people. We used to hang. I used to make soup with white people. I used to have sleepovers, no sex, with white people. I used to make sushi with white people. I used to go running with white people, shopping with white people, out to dinner with white people. Ridiculous. Ridiculous amounts of time with white people. And I was thinking, one really disgraceful moment in my confusion, I was going to work. And I worked at a school in East Bay, California. Going to work, dropping off our children just at their classroom, and then I'm going to my other task at the school. Most of our children, non-white. Going to drop them off, and we get to their classroom. Most of the staff that work with these children are white females. So I go in the classroom. I think at this point I'd been working there maybe a year, so I knew most of the people who worked there. I knew most of them pretty well. So I go in, speak to all these white females, and I think I hug one of the white females. I'm also working with a black female. She comes in with me. And I hug one of the white females. I'm going to put stuff down, and, you have a lot of junk from the children. I go to exit the classroom, and I see a different white female that I knew. And she gave me a hug, and the black female that I'm with, she said, "Oh, I'm so disgusted. I'm so tired of seeing you hugging these white chicks. It's just, it's disgusting, and I hate it." I'm so confused. I remember looking at her and just going, "Oh my gosh, that is crazy. Like, you're such a hater." And I think I said something to that effect. Like, I think I'm quoting myself. Like, you're such a hater, and I can't believe you would say something like that. And I'm snickering while I'm saying this. What is wrong with you? And I think I went and hugged the white girl again, just to spite her. Like, what is wrong with you? Get out of here! Stop acting crazy. And I walked away, and she actually apologized the next day. Man, the confusion. She apologized, and she said, I was wrong. I shouldn't have said that. My bad. And it's just like, no worries. Kept it pushing. Confusion. Yeah, and I say that all the time. White people have done a job on us. White people have really done a job. And I told the victim yesterday, had I stayed in California, I'm quite certain I would have had more white friends. The sex thing likely would have happened, and I would have been lost. I just don't think I would have recovered and had the clarity, to be honest, about white supremacy. So thankfully it didn't happen. But yeah, I did have many embarrassing moments in my confusion, as do I think all victims of white supremacy. They've really done a job confusing us. White friends, white friends. At any rate, do you have anything else you wanted to share with the listeners, Justice?
Nope.
Groovy. Alrighty. Yeah, that's giving me an idea for a program, White Friends. A program on white friends. I'm pretty certain that one could
there is such thing as white friends.
Yeah. Like our incidents when we were confused and had such an animal, a white friend. Yeah, at any rate, again, I think the program cut out for a bit for the folks on TalkShoe. It cut out. I didn't recognize that we weren't broadcasting on TalkShoe. The archive should be seamless because the free HD line, there were no difficulties. So the portion that you missed, you can just download, and it should be great, no problems. And hopefully, hopefully the information will be worthwhile. I definitely think Mr. Akers, I suspect him of consciously practicing white supremacy deliberately during the program. But I also think the information, I always talk about that little whitey inside of us, Dr. Cambon's concept. I think hearing this sort of information, it helps reduce that little whitey inside of us that tries to defend white people and keep us from being honest about white people being our enemy, the problem. Hearing this sort of information helps keep that little whitey inside. At least for me, it helps keep him in check, her in check. So, and I think it's just good to hear this sort of information, all the grisly graphic details, white people being proud about this sort of conduct and information that, as he said, that you might have had the very same white people who killed this white woman then going and being the main ones participating in killing black people. I mean, at any rate, if folks that are on the line, if you all have any questions, comments, I'm certain some people at TalkShoe missed portions of the program, so they might not feel able to comment on what Mr. Akers shared. But if people are on TalkShoe and you have questions or comments, I can get you all, people on the free HD line as well, if you'll have questions or comments. If not, that's fine too, because it's a pretty nice day. I would not have a problem going out to get sunshine either. And again, we'll be back on Tuesday, February 5th. We might be back before then. I have to see. But definitely Tuesday, February 5th, Robert Wintersmith. I haven't put it in the system yet, but I will do so today. Dr. Robert Wintersmith, author of Police and the Black Community, should be very constructive. He seems to be very informed. He's an older gentleman, and he seems to be very informed about racism, white supremacy, and I think it'll give context for the savage behavior that enforcement officers consistently mete out to black people. I think his book will provide quite a bit of information on that. But this Tuesday, and again, I think it's going to be in the morning, 10 p.m. Pacific or 1 p.m. Eastern. So if you're on the East Coast, 1 p.m. in the afternoon. West Coast should be 10 a.m. Pacific time, but should be very constructive. I'll check again if anyone has any questions, comments on the TalkShoe line or the free HD line. Double check, and if not, we can wrap up. We can get rest. If you all have suggestions for programs, things we should check out, please let me know. If you have any problems with the archives, you can let me know that as well. White people, stay on their job, be constructive, and be active. They depend on us to not be efficient with our time, to not use this information. Tim Wise said that. Timothy, don't drink the Kool-Aid. Said that some time ago, that people who listen to the cows, they're not going to do anything. They'll just sit around and get the information and not act on it. I hope that any constructive information you get about racism, white supremacy, is utilized, not just stored, and not just, this is nice to know, but that you are using that information to keep from being harmed by white people and to be active in letting other non-white people know, because that is, in my opinion, that is one of the core problems. Non-white people just not being informed. I think Mr. Akers said that on the program today. He was going to talk to some of these black people, and their own children didn't know this information. That if a white man hadn't come to talk to them about this incident, their own children and family members would have never heard this information. And I've just seen evidence that happens way too often. If it's anything you can do to share information with other victims, to get information from other victims, particularly older victims who might know tons of this sort of information, try to get that from them. The more honest we can be about things that have happened, things we've experienced, what white people have done to us, the quicker we can make progress solving this problem. Because that sort of thing, once you know more about what white people have and are doing to us, it becomes much more difficult to say, well, it's not that big a problem. It's not that big a deal. Things are getting big. It becomes much more difficult to say all that. So, yeah, I hope people take the information, be active. We got too many spectators. That's in the code book. If we're codifying, we have way too many spectators. We need folks that are being focused, constructive, and active. And active, trying to correct problems for non-white people, black people. With that, I don't see any hands, so I assume people are good. Again, I know the folks at TalkShoe, I didn't catch early that there was a problem with the TalkShoe line. I will attempt to be more mindful about that. I know white people, they seem to be very active, so I'll be more active and vigilant to make sure that problems are not occurring. But again, the archive, it should be great. Shouldn't be any problems. I will upload it immediately to the TalkShoe sites. You can download it, and you'll be able to hear everything that was said. And we will be back. Check the Facebook page for updates. And thanks for tuning in. Context of White Supremacy. Justice, do you have anything before we sign out? Waiting. Saw Mr. Williams in the chat room earlier. Counter-racism. Also, make sure I get in Reckless 2.0. Check out their broadcast. And we'll just plug Justice's blog as well. Just do justice today.blogspot.com. Just do justice today.blogspot.com. Again, we'll be back on Tuesday. I suspect we might be back before then. Check the website, check Facebook, subscribe at TalkShoe so that you get the phone updates. We will be back. Replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. White friends, man. Cows signing out.